Well, hello everyone. It's John Laughland here. I'm the Director of Forum for Democracy International. I'm joined today by my co-host Peter Lavelle from Moscow and by our someone who's already been on the forum a couple of times, Pascal Lottaz. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you on again, Pascal. You're a lecturer in politics and international relations in Japan at the University of Kyoto, and you run the remarkably interesting and very successful, I think, podcast Neutrality Studies. And we wanted to get you on, Pascal. We wanted to take advantage of the fact that you're in Europe and not many hours ahead in the Far East, basically to get your reading on the fallout from the Iran war. We don't know what's happening. Trump has, for the I think 40th time now, announced an imminent peace plan. We're all sitting on the edges of our seats for Friday, when he's promised it for. Are we able to say what the fallout has been, Pascal, now, independently of what may or may not happen on Friday? Are we able to say what has been the fallout from this war, which in the end only lasted, at least for the violent part, a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks? Are we able to gauge what the fallout will be, both, of course, for the region, but also for the world more generally, and perhaps in particular for the Far East, where you're currently based? Go ahead, Pascal.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And the one thing we can say for sure is that the Iran war was a pretty huge debacle for the United States, for Israel too, of course, that this didn't go the way it was supposed to. This was either supposed to achieve regime change or lay waste to the entire country, the massive Libanization or Gazaization of Iran, or something like what happened in Syria. Those were kind of the things that were told to us by the United States, by Israel, what they wanted to achieve, and nothing of this happened. Very much the opposite. And the United States is being basically largely thrown out of the region, although we all have to wait for what's going to be signed on Friday here in Switzerland, where I currently am. We haven't seen the actual points that are going to be signed, and not that these points would actually mean that that's what's going to happen, but what these points are is what they are willing to sign. This is what they're willing to go with, and this is what both sides are willing to say, like, we're going to put our names under it. So that will give us a lot of clarity, actually, on what was aspired versus what was then achieved. And the one thing is clear is that it is a huge debacle for the United States.
Well, even without the points, even without the details, if the Iranian chief negotiator turns up in Geneva and signs with the American vice president, that, as you say, is proof of a debacle, at least for Israel, because Israel is having this thing negotiated over its head, isn't it? And the Iranians and the Americans are talking to each other directly for the first time in decades.
One of the things we don't know is the theatrics of it. This is a big theater, actually, on both sides. And the Iranians, in my view, have learned how to play the theater as well. So we just currently don't know what is real, what is serious, what are the actual concessions, and what is just theatrics around it. But we can say for certain that it didn't go the way it was supposed to, and that that this, whatever it is an end of something that according to the United States should have gone a completely different way. And I just want to make it clear, I do not think that this is over.
Yeah.
I agree. Last year we had a 12-day war. This year we had a 40-day war. It was exactly 40 days. Yeah. And this was round number 2. I do not think we're done, and I don't think the Iranians think we're done. But at the moment, it seems that both sides can get something out of a break. And I do think, especially the Iranians, will take it as such, and they will prepare for the third round, which will come, because the United States at this point is incapable. It's incapable as a system to come up with anything binding. They will never bind themselves to anything. It's all transactional, and right now they want the break because of the oil, because of the flows, because of the criticism, because of the shortage of missiles and implements of war. How long the break will last is anyone's guess, but I do not think it has much longer than 12 to 24 months until something else will happen. And I would be very surprised if the actual truce on the high sea, the end of the blockade and the end of the US trying to impede Iranian shipping and so on, if that actually came about, that would surprise me. I think there will be further interdictions, and the United States will immediately, in my view, renege on a lot of the promises, especially on the ones of paying the Iranians money. That seems to be part of the deal, although again we haven't seen the final outcome. The Iranians say so, but I am pretty sure this is going to be another one of these tactics of pretending that something will happen, for which they then will find a million reasons why it cannot be done after being silent on it for a long time. But it will be some form of a break.
I'm very much looking forward to the meeting, the Iranian leadership and J.D. Vance, for the very reason is that not only did the United States not have regime change, did not destroy the nation state known as the Islamic Republic of Iran, but basically they're meeting face to face. This is Israel's greatest nightmare. They actually, because they recognize, they maybe hate each other, but they recognize the legitimate right of both sides. This is the worst nightmare for Israel and its supporters. And, on my program yesterday, I had a very well-known Iranian political scientist from the same university as our friend is Mohammad Marandi. And I posited, I said, the Iranians could quite easily release what the memorandum is, but they won't, because they're going to watch Trump bend himself into a pretzel like J.D. Vance and everybody else, because they're watching the theater. As Pascal just said, this is theater, and they're going to reap as much as possible from it. I don't think the Iranians have any illusions whatsoever, but it's worth going through this for this week. Now it's going to be in 2 more days for this theater, because Iran is getting the legitimacy from the United States of America that it has not had for 47 years.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're getting the big stage, and they're going to be invited to the big stage. And just remember, they actually, they were talking about Geneva the whole time, and just today I learned they're going to do it in Bergenstock, the same place where 2 years ago the Swiss organized that phony peace conference where they didn't invite Russia. It's going to be in the same place. And Russia was not invited. And the Iranians got themselves to the point where they get invited, right? And again, on eye level, and the Americans have to accept them as equals. And this is a huge change, because the Americans the US tried to basically decapitate and kill anyone, right? And they were very proud of this. They were gloating at it. And then they had to learn something very weird, something very bizarre, that even with a decapitation strike, the other side wouldn't die. They just had new heads growing out again and again. How do you kill something that you can decapitate and it doesn't die? And they didn't find an answer to that. So the only plus, Iran actually established the reciprocity again, because for everything that the US struck and Israel struck, they struck something of equal value immediately and with precision, and they were able to do it. So for the first time in a long time, the United States had real hurt imposed on itself and on its immediate allies. It doesn't really care about its allies. The only ally it kind of remotely cares about is Israel. The Gulf states it doesn't, but it cares about its soldiers, it cares about its bases, and that Iran was able to just obliterate them and destroy them. That really hurt. And now,
Pascal, it's very important that if an official American delegation is meeting their rough equivalents from Iran, why can't the Gulf monarchies go straight and talk to the Iranians as well? The spell is broken. The spell is, everybody can talk to them. They talk to J.D. Vance.
And which is exactly what they're doing. And by the way, when we talk about the Gulf states, we constantly forget that Oman was neutral, is neutral, and will remain neutral, and is actually having a relationship with them, and that Arakchi has been talking to the Omanis and went to Oman and met them. And they are now going to administer whatever that's going to be. I mean, Donald Trump will tell us that there are no tariffs. Yes, because it's gonna be more like works completed. It's like for security purposes.
Yeah, but it won't be payments.
There will be payments. There will just be
payments. It's not going to be a tariff.
Yeah, it's gonna be payment for services. It's gonna be service related. It's something like that. It's absolutely beautiful. So, and the Iranians are gonna sit there and nod whenever Trump says it's not a tariff. They're just gonna nod because they know that it's known. So they don't need to do anything about this anymore. Again, they've learned how to play the theater and actually how to direct it against the United States. They've even learned how to use social media with the Lego movies and so on. And now the World Cup. They're using the World Cup in order to bring back the memory of these 170 killed schoolgirls, and they do that very, very sophisticatedly. You know,
their matches are well attended. Their matches are well attended. Yeah. They have the support of the global South.
Yeah. They do, and you know, I'm marveling at the way that Iran managed to pull this off, because just 3-4 weeks ago, the Ukrainian/NATO alliance killed more than 20 school kids in Russia, in Lugansk, right? And the Western media was completely able to ignore that. Well, Iran made sure that the West is not able to ignore the 170 from Minab. You know, I mean, we still have to analyze how Iran did all of these things, but they managed to kind of seriously break in, and now break through and go to a place where even Russia couldn't go so far. So, in a sense, I mean, not to criticize Russia, it's just to say that the Iranian strategy worked on a level that I think nobody saw coming. Also, the Chinese. I talked to my Chinese colleagues. They all said China basically wrote Iran already off after the first week, and it was anything but a write-off. It was, the strategy worked to an incredible degree.
And the point you make about Iran striking back, as it did was it just only this week, or was it a couple of days ago when it struck in Israel following Israel's attacks on Lebanon? That corroborates totally what you said, but also, of course, humiliates the United States of America, which claimed repeatedly in the mouth of Rubio and Hegseth and so on, and probably Trump too, to have totally degraded their ballistic missile capacity, whereas we can see that that's completely untrue. In other words, literally none of the war aims. I mean, you mentioned regime change and obviously the nuclear program and so on, but if you remember then a week or so into the war, Marco Rubio said, how can you say we don't have objectives? We do, write them down. And they were to degrade the missile capacity, to destroy the Navy, to do this and to do that. In other words, they were new objectives, not regime change or the nuclear one. And yet that also has not, of course, been achieved. So the credibility, obviously, the credibility of the United States is just zero.
And months ago, the axis of resistance was completely written off. Now they are front and center. Pascal, are what we seeing as a result of this ridiculous war, are we seeing finally the end of Sykes-Picot in the Middle East?
No.
The reason why I say that is that, I'm not really particularly concerned with a lot of the political scientists from the Gulf countries, okay? But if you look at a lot of global South thinkers, this is the last neo-colonial war in the Middle East that finally shatters the Sykes-Picot. Because if we look at all of these countries, they are the creations of colonialism, okay? Irrespective of, look at like Bahrain, okay? It's run by the Sunni, but its population is Shia. I mean, natural development of nation states overall wouldn't have something like that happen, okay? And I think it's very important to look at it from that point of view, because it allows us, and going back to my comment that, now the Gulf countries can, openly and be freely talked to. Now there can be a realignment of the region and a more natural, organic sense of what each country's interests are. They don't have to like each other, but there's no one on the outside. No one can call 911. They're going to have to take care of themselves.
I mean, Sykes-Picot, if you mean in the sense that it ends this colonial enterprise, then yes. But I don't think it will change the borders very much, because one thing we have seen,
fine.
Across the globe, we have seen that the global South dealt with the borders that they were imposed with, be it in Africa, in Arabia, be it in Southeast Asia. They're rolling with it, and this will probably continue also in the Gulf area. I don't see massive kind of changes of the map happening, except for the area around Israel, because Israel is violently trying to change everything and to expand its territory and do its Greater Israel project and so on. And in a sense, the Sykes-Picot borders are rather going to work against that, because the entire world is set kind of against this form of neo-colonial and neo-imperial project that the Zionists are running. I would just like also to point out that one of the war aims of Iran was, of course, to chase out the Americans of the Gulf area, and I think they will achieve that to some degree, at least not having more U.S. troops stationed. They didn't have as a war aim to destroy Israel. Actually, they never said they want Israel eradicated from the map. So I do think that we have a chance, actually, at not at a solution, of course not, but at something that might contain Israel and prevent it from further expanding. Because one thing that Iran was also very careful of is to make sure that it doesn't create a situation in which Israel would have this existence-threatening moment when it would use one of its roughly 90 nuclear warheads, or several ones of them, against Iran. And luckily, I must say, luckily, we didn't see that. It didn't go nuclear. So far. I do hope it remains like that, but we didn't see it, because at some point it got really, really close when Donald Trump made these comments of eradicating a civilization, right?
I think that is the key question, is Israel. It remains the key question. Just a small historical quibble on Sykes-Picot. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, the famous line in the sand from the E in Acre to the K in Kirkuk, a sort of diagonal line dividing what would be the French zone of influence and the British zone of influence, was signed in 1916 in the British Foreign Office, but it was effectively destroyed before it had even been implemented by the Balfour Declaration of November 1917, because in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Palestine was due to be under international administration. But by the Balfour Declaration, and by this wonderful promise that the British made of something they didn't then have, it then, of course, became a British mandate. And that was not in keeping with the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So yes, Sykes-Picot is a symbol of colonial power, but in fact exactly, of course, I understand that. Yeah, but I mean, it encourages us, this little quibble, to focus on the key problem, which indeed is Israel, because you know, we're talking about the Gulf states maybe, I don't know, reassessing their relationship or whatever with Iran, but the fact is that Israel now is, as we know, occupies part of Lebanon and obviously the West Bank and so on, and Gaza and all the rest of it, and parts of Syria and things like that. And I from here can't judge. I've seen the leader of the opposition in Israel very angry at Netanyahu, who is saying he's compromised our security and all the rest of it. I think that surely is the key, because after all, Iran, is present by proxy in Lebanon through Hezbollah and so on. So I'm not sure that that nut is going to be very easy to crack, however much other things might fall into place.
But if Israel is at the center of all of this, then the Palestinian issue is.
Yeah, and it is, and you know, I've had discussions with Iranian analysts from Iran, who one of them was making the argument that as we go forward, everything will be very much transactional and pragmatic, and that Iran overall has done away with ideology. And then I talked to Saeed Mohammad Marandi, and he says the opposite. It's like, no, this is still about ideology. This is still about the axis of resistance, and we are not at all in this kind of very transactional mode. No, the ideology of anti-colonialism, of the decolonization of the entire Gulf region, this is very much on their minds. And I tend to believe him, or to think that for a large part of the Iranian society, it's rather the Marandi thinking that's probably very important when you look at the way that they implemented the war as well, and the way that they defended themselves. Because the thing that Iran managed to pull off that nobody else did is to just accept that you have to absorb. Including the head of state, who was basically willing to be killed, and killed he was, and others were killed too, but that is part and parcel of the entire strategy, and that's why they were so incredibly difficult to defeat. They are absorbing while being able to counterstrike. So they established a second strike, a conventional second strike capability, which in the end carried them through this whole thing. That's new. And, the political changes on the ground, again, I do think they will come. The main question will be, what is Israel going to do? And will it ever reach a point where Zionism, this political project of Zionism, will cease to grip the majority of the population, and that there will be an understanding that Israel, to exist, must integrate into the larger region? Because right now they're doing the opposite, right? They're taking themselves out and killing everybody around them who stands in the way. And as long as that strategy doesn't go away, I don't think that the antagonism to Iran and the axis of resistance will ever stop, because you're a colonial project. You are an apartheid colonial project surrounded by natives who, by the definition of what you're doing, you must be at war with. And unless that changes, the warfare itself is probably never going to completely calm down.
Yes, but that would mean that Israel would have to abandon Zionism.
Yes, it would have to abandon the idea of Israel as a state for the Jews and the Jews only. National exclusionary exclusionary nationalism, that would have been to be abandoned and replaced maybe by something like what the French are doing, inclusive nationalism, right? Where Palestinians too can be part of the state and proper part of the state, and not second, third, fourth class citizens, or just something to be genocided along your borders. So but that goes to the heart, to the core of the Zionist project, and not just the Jewish Zionist project. It goes to the core of the Christian Zionist project, of the Hexeths of the world, and the nut jobs, the Christian nut jobs who want to achieve Armageddon through implementing Jewish Zionist, the Jewish Zionist state. Hexeth and
Huckabee
too.
Hexeth as well. Yeah,
we must never forget there is way more Christian Zionists than Jewish Zionists.
That's right.
We must never forget it's not a problem of the Jews, not at all. The Jews are not the problem. Zionism as a political project, which is inherently actually an atheist or agnostic project, that's the issue, and that is European colonial at its heart.
Well, I mean, the origins of Christian Zionism, I mean, it's like, give the Jews a state so they can get out of here and go there. I mean, it wasn't even magnanimous, okay? I mean, it was poison at its very core.
You mentioned the Balfour Declaration. The only person in the British cabinet who was vocally against it and wrote against it was the only Jewish member of cabinet whose name I just forgot. Norman
Montague. Was it Montague?
Montague. Yeah. He wrote against this, and he said, "This is just your anti-Semitism. You just want to get rid of us in Europe." And that's what that's such an important aspect, and it's of course in current public discourse.
We've talked about, and there is no doubt that the United States and Israel have experienced a catastrophic strategic defeat here. However, again, we have to wait for the text, but Iran has proven to be really resilient and being able to absorb punishment. I think Pascal is absolutely right about that, and that may have something very much to do with a Shia worldview that is so powerful.
It's not just absorption; it's part of the whole cult of martyrdom and so on, which is the absolute basis of Shiite Islam.
But there's another side of this, and that's why we need to see the text, because the United States still has enormous economic and financial power through tariffs, Swiss system, sanctions, and all of this. That's going to be the tough nut for the Iranians to confront and get around or overcome. And that is it feels good to say the Americans have no card. Well, they have plenty of cards. They're not very powerful cards in the scheme of things, but they are meaningful. You can win a hand, if I can use the
Americans. The Americans have won substantial gains in this war. Yes, they've lost the war against Iran, that's for sure, but they have won something very important, and that is that they are now the biggest. They have been for some time the biggest producers of oil and gas, both oil and gas. America is now the biggest producer in the world, and they have established themselves through the chaos that they have created in the Middle East as objectively the most reliable suppliers of oil and gas, because a large amount of Qatar's capacity and so on has been destroyed. Refineries in Saudi Arabia and in the Emirates and so on. So in that sense, yes, Peter, they do have cards. and they have, in fact, improved their hand, at least on that point.
Yeah, and I would like to make a very important point that I keep repeating also in other places. There's a huge difference between losing a war and not winning one. So this is an instance of the United States not winning a war, which we all equate with losing, but that's not true. You know, in the Vietnam War, you know, the United States didn't win the war, but the war was lost by South Vietnam because it went away. It was completely, utterly destroyed. Germany lost the war. Japan lost the war. The United States didn't win this one. And the United States stands to fight another day. So does Iran. And we equate that because Iran started, of course, as the underdog, right? So it stood its ground. But what we're looking at is essentially a tie, right? And the outcome of this now will then determine where this is going and whether Iran will now have the new economic capabilities, new interactions, whether it will be freed from the yoke of the sanctions, which I doubt very, very heavily. Even if it's in the text, I doubt that it will be gone. There will be other ways to implement this. But if Iran actually manages to benefit economically out of this and develop and have respite and also develop its nuclear, and not nuclear, sorry, the nuclear program for sure not, but the missile program, which if I was Iran, missile and drones were the winning strategy. So I would invest in that one heavily. But so I just want to make that one clear. So overall, I think the Gulf region will change, but it will change over time. I think the ones who had the most substantial blow against their entire foreign policy strategy is the Gulf states, excluding Oman. Oman worked, but the others didn't. And the others, in my view, will follow actually in the lead of Oman one way or another because of an absence of options. The United States has an option undermined itself so dramatically that whether they want it and whether they will admit it and whether they will say so or not, it's going to lead to a change of strategy, and probably, and that's my hope, to something a little bit more stable. They will never fall in love with Iran, I'm absolutely sure, but maybe there will be some form of a working arrangement that will bit by bit start excluding the United States.
So you would say that if we're going to revise our nomenclature here, Iran won a technical knockout of the United States. Like if we use the boxing term, okay, Iran won on points.
Yeah, it won on points. We're basically they managed to pull off a very surprising tie with the US,
exactly,
and forced them to go on a break. And that in and of itself is, of course, a victory, but it's a victory of the underdog. It's not the victory of, the Soviet Union over Nazi Germany. It's a very different kind of victory. It's just let's keep that in mind. So, which is why I also think we will see a comeback of this. And look at, the United States. One things that they do is as much as we think that all of their policy is short term, some of their strategy are extremely long term. How long they worked on Syria. How long they worked against Libya, how long they worked on the entire region. The 7 wars in 5 years wasn't 5 years, but was 7 wars. and
the project against Russia is far from over.
And the project is far from over. And anyone looking at this also just thinks like, how much time will it take until something starts in the Pacific? So, nobody expects the United States and NATO to go suddenly into peace mode and be the new bringers of actual peace. They're going to go back, they're going to reload, and they're going to try something again. Russia experienced that several times, right? Whenever the United States hit a hard wall with Russia or the Soviet Union, they had sunshine diplomacy, everything was good. Lavrov meeting Hillary Clinton, they push a big reset button. And it was all BS. It was all BS, including, as we know by now, the Minsk agreements. And Russia had every reason to think that was a good idea because it was a good idea, but it was never meant seriously. And so, I'm looking at this, at the Birkenstock, what's going to happen on Friday in the same view. It's going to be the big reset button, the theater to say like, yeah, finally solution. But they're already working on round number 3. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely certain the Iranians are very much aware of that.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Far East, the Pacific, Pascal. That was one of the things we wanted to get you on to talk about, because I know you've been traveling in the last week or so. But how do you think How do you think the Qatars and the Bahrains of the Far East are regarding this? I'm thinking, of course, obviously of Japan and so on.
Well, I mean, for Japan and for South Korea, this was, on the one hand, a blow because the United States wasn't able to defend those little Gulf states against Iran. So how are they going to defend them against China? But then again, both of them also have a strategy, have their own strategies of how to face the significant other. And what they are just learning is, again, an affirmation of what they already learned during the first Trump administration, that if push comes to shove, you need to have capabilities of your own. And that is something that is not very positive, because it's only going to worry China very much, and maybe Russia too. Because especially,
does that include proliferation?
I hope not. I hope not. I mean, in Japan, the nuclear taboo is still very large among the general population. We know, and it is an open secret, that Japan is about 6 months away from a bomb, because the civilian program, for all intents and purposes, can also be used for a military one. The whole distinction of civilian and military is largely artificial, and it's one of the reasons. Nobody ever said so, but it is well understood, and I've heard people in security circles in Japan say that behind closed doors. One of the reasons to maintain a civilian program is to keep the option open in the future. And that's, of course, very, very dangerous, because China knows that, and we've seen how allergic they have reacted very recently to the comments of Takaichi about Taiwan, and how they also said if Japan ever tries to get a bomb, then that would be a reason for them to do a nuclear first strike. And I don't think they're kidding. I think they are serious about this. And the problem is that Japan has a very, very shallow understanding of how dramatic the memory for the Chinese and the Russians is of the Second World War. For the Japanese, it's dramatic too, because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But what the last 70 years, what they did is they focused on the suffering. War is bad, war is bad, war is bad. Everybody suffered during the war, therefore we must overcome war, which is a good message. It's a good message, but it means that they left out the who did it. Who was the perpetrator part, and this is why they have a hard time understanding why the Chinese are still so bitter. And I kid you not, I've even left-wing friends of mine in Japan say, like, Pascal, why are the Chinese still so angry? I mean, everybody suffered during the war, right? We all suffered, and that's a problem, you know.
If you have a narrative that the war started when the bombing of Hiroshima and the war ended on the bombing of Nagasaki, then you can understand the reaction of the entire region, and that's what the Japanese have done. They focused on their suffering. That's it.
They did. And the good thing is it bred a lot of pacifism, very strong pacifism and anti-nuclear pacifism. So that's a good thing. On the other hand, it impedes the understanding for how the other side still feels about all of this. And, you know, one more thing that this Western narrative did, I mean, the Japanese, unfortunately, are masters in sucking up the Western narrative. You know, to them, the Second World War, most people, if you ask them, when did the Second World War start in Japan? Most of them will say Pearl Harbor, 1941. Yeah. And they will a lot of people will just forget about 31 to 41, which was the whole China issue. And in China, millions of people died. I mean, estimates are up to 35 million overall between 31 and 45, which is even larger than what the Soviet Union lost. And that awareness in Japan, although it's not being suppressed, there's no mass scale kind of attempt at erasing this history, not at all. But it's not on the front of people's minds. Whereas in China, it very much is, and that would need dealing with.
Pascal, a slightly different subject. I know that you're involved. I believe you're involved in a referendum campaign on neutrality in your home country, Switzerland. Perhaps you could tell us something about that, because were you to win, I mean, I assume you're obviously campaigning for a motion for the neutrality to be reinforced or at least reaffirmed. Were it to win, it would be a wonderful sign, wouldn't it? Because neutrality is very much out of fashion, as I don't need to tell you, and has been already severely compromised, obviously, in Switzerland itself now for some decades. Perhaps you could tell us about your campaign and how it's going.
Yeah, so neutrality has been hollowed out over the last 30 years dramatically, especially in Europe, including in Switzerland, and we've seen what happened to Finland and Sweden. The entire ideology, the entire thinking of let's not piss off either of the two warring sides in order to remain stable was really kind of pushed away by the idea of we need to be on the right side of history and oppose evil wherever the West sees evil, right? So this same thing happened in the neutral countries, including in Switzerland. Now, the referendum that you're referring to was started in 2022 in fall, about half a year after the special military operation began, and Switzerland within 4 days started imposing sanctions too, and that worried quite a few of us. I must say though, the one thing Switzerland didn't do is sending weapons. It never sent weapons to Ukraine, and it also forbid re-export of its weapons that were in Germany and France, wherever, to Ukraine. I mean, that also was forbidden, which is also, Switzerland still has some parts of its neutral tradition. It, for instance, is also still the diplomatic service provider of last resort for Russia and Georgia. It's still the consulate. The Swiss consulate in Russia is there for the Georgians, and the Swiss consulate in Georgia is there for the Russians. They have a Russia desk in Georgia, and the Swiss do that because they're still, at least on that part, trusted by both sides. But of course, the sanctions hold out a lot of that. And Russia put Switzerland on the unfriendly country list because of these sanctions. And we closed our airspace to the Russians, and the Russians closed theirs to ours. So we don't fly. I mean, so we are economically, we're in the same boat. And this is something that angered especially people in the center right, and they started a referendum, and I then started campaigning on the left because I'm a paying member of the Social Democrats, a card-carrying member of the Social Democrats, and it kind of made me angry that especially the Social Democrats kept saying this is a it's a right-wing referendum. No, it's not. It's just a straightforward kind of let's go back to the roots, integral neutrality, meaning military neutrality and economic neutrality. And the referendum itself proposes to write a definition of neutrality into our constitution, which currently mentions the word twice, but never defines it. And we have the proposal is like four paragraphs, armed neutrality, and the most important one is also economic neutrality in the sense of no sanctions, except when the UN mandates it, or when we need to do it in order to not be sanctions ourselves. So it's not an all or nothing. It's more of a change from default sanction what the West sanctions to default no sanctions at all, unless some overriding reasons. And that's the referendum took quite a lot of time, but we the people supporting it, including me, we gathered enough signatures, 100,000 signatures within 18 months, actually 118. And now it's going to be a mandatory referendum this September.
And have you managed to persuade other people on the center left? Have you managed to shift that perception of it as a right-wing proposal? Have you managed to do that, do you think?
It's
in other words, is it gaining broad support? Is it being discussed on its merits?
It is being discussed now, and it will be discussed even more in August. I think our federal council, our government, the cabinet, they kind of chose September. I kind of dislike that because it means it will happen right during the summer break, and that's kind of not good for the discussion. But well, that's part of their strategy of how they could, because they can arrange the timeline. Well, what we managed to do is we managed to gather voices on the left, not on the center left, on the extreme left, actually. The parties that support it are the communists and the Workers' Party and all of the other like Marxist left traditions, which understand that what we are looking at is imperialism, of course, European imperialism, and they oppose that, and they say like, no, in order to oppose this kind of thing, what we need to do is to maintain strict neutrality. So what we're looking at is the nationalist-minded or national-minded, conservative-minded center right, and the Marxist understanding of world politics left that are now campaigning separately from each other, because but in the same direction. And my hope is that we will convince enough people in the center to give us a double majority, which we need. We need more than 50% of total votes. I mean,
and the cantons,
all total meeting, and more than 50% of cantons. So 14 out of the 26 need to say yes. I think that we can do, because the little cantons in the center tend to be rather conservative. the problem will be the 50%. So the no campaign is very strong because they literally, they call it a pro-Putin initiative, a pro-Putin referendum.
Go into detail about that. Okay, you already said, being on the right side of history. What is the geopolitical security angle to do away with a very successful policy of neutrality for Switzerland? What are their arguments?
The problem we have in Switzerland, just like all over Europe, is that people now discuss morals. What's the moral thing to do? Should
everything
we
is moral
export
framing,
weapons to Ukraine because it's the morally right thing to do? Should we not? Killing people, yes or no? Like I watched this discussion in our national broadcaster, 1 hour, and they invited this guy who's like heading the Rheinmetall Switzerland, like the Swiss part of that, right? And they're like, but in order to remain a viable business, we have to be able to export our weapons. If we want to produce for Switzerland, we also need to produce for other countries, and other countries are not going to order weapons if we don't sell in case of war. So we have that problem. Not once these people mentioned the problem that, well, if Rheinmetall delivers weapons to Ukraine or a country that is at war with Russia, and these weapons are used to kill Russians, then, well, the Russians might just Oreshnik that factory in Switzerland, which is very well known where it is. I mean, an Oreshnik will have no problem finding that thing. And that idea is kind of so alien to them at the moment. This was not alien to people 100 years ago, but it's alien to people now who think in morals and in economic terms. And economics is surprisingly close to morals, actually. So there is no more the pragmatism of the old Switzerland of 100 years ago is kind of absent at the moment. And I think on the right and the left, we're currently trying to argue the case why this has to be brought back, because if not, the Oreshnik will find Switzerland on a map as well.
Well, I mean, one of the things John and I have talked about since the inception of this podcast is the process in which elites all through Europe have been co-opted into the neoliberal mindset, and through the institutions, for example, of NATO, first and foremost, and also the European Union. I mean, is there a cadre of people in Switzerland that are been co-opted, been recruited? Because do they want to be part of the pecking order, for example? I mean, I lived, everybody knows I live in Russia, but I lived in Poland for 10 years before I moved to Russia. And I saw slowly but surely this recruitment, the Radek Sikorsky type, where they actually have more allegiance to Western institutions than to their own country. Okay. Is that a process that you can identify in Switzerland?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the ideology itself and the thinking, the kind of the thought process is very similar now to what happens in other countries. No, in the sense that we never joined the European Union, and we never joined these large institutions, also NATO. So there's some lack of integration, which then also means that the elites cannot rise through these ranks, right? There's also a surprising lack of these NGO kind of things. There are NGOs in Switzerland, but unless I completely missed it, I would argue that there's far less of this type of NED sponsored kind of infiltration politics, because Switzerland always swam along anyhow, and it was not something you needed to care about very much. Also, after the Second World War, we were not at the center of the Cold War rivalry anymore. One of the problems was the banks, but they were reined in quite well, and Switzerland was integrated into the system anyhow, so there was no need to infiltrate and so on. So what this leaves us with is people who kind of sign up to the ideology because that's just how the discourse goes. And I would argue an absence of these, also the structures through which they could rise, because there's a natural top. And in this sense, you can maybe argue that we boil as well, just like the rest of Europe, but on a lower flame. I would say, like, if Germany burns on 100%, then Switzerland burns somewhere between 35 to 45%, so somewhere there. And the discourse is also less poisoned and still more open. I mean, Switzerland never banned RT. Never banned Sputnik. We can still watch it here. The Swiss said that's just not what we do. The Swiss, again, there's things that they didn't do, and that also reflects not necessarily a love for Russia, but it reflects this kind of lower boiling point.
I think the point about economic sanctions is obviously very important, because we all know that is a form of warfare, and it's understood as such when the sanctions were first announced back in 2022. I mean, the latest round, they were, of course, as Bruno Le Maire, the French finance minister, said, designed to provoke the collapse of the Russian economy. So that's very good that you've put that on the agenda. And indeed, if we go back to the beginning again, back into history, we're talking about Sykes-Picot and the Balfour Declaration. It was at Versailles that Woodrow Wilson said that economic sanctions would be more terrible than warfare. He actually foresaw a world in which economic warfare would replace real warfare.
And it just let me say, I mean, we have studies, and the most recent one came out in December, several studies actually, in the Lancet journal, the most prestigious public health journal in the world, that did the scientific study between 1971 and 2021. Every year, 500,000 people die of the effects of sanctions. 500,000 every year. That's more in most years. In all years that they looked at, that was more than of violent conflict directly. So economic warfare kills much more people, and it kills indirectly by making sure that these countries don't have access to healthcare, that they lack basic provisions, that they lack food, that people cannot get the necessities of life, and it's very cruel. It's extremely cruel. And Switzerland is embedded in this. And even today, still people think when we talk about sanctions, we talk about standing up to Putin. That's not what sanctions do. That's not what they do. They work against the general population.
But I would have thought that would be a very powerful. That would be a very powerful, a moral argument, Pascal, which you could surely use in your own debate. I'm sure you are using it.
Yeah. We are using it. It's difficult to tell people who are accustomed to the idea that sanctions mean we prohibit greedy Swiss companies from doing business with oligarchs. That's what it is. We forbid business with oligarchs and from feeding Putin's war machine. That's what they are doing. So we're doing a good thing. It's very hard to people who are accustomed to this thinking to tell them, look, that's not what they're doing. Sanctions kill 500,000 people every day. And again, this Lancet journal, I mean, that's only the illegal US sanctions and European sanctions, unilateral ones. That doesn't even include the actual legal UN sanctions that were imposed on Iran and North Korea and so on, right?
Yeah.
Just to put that there.
Well, Pascal, if Switzerland were to abandon its neutrality, will it join NATO?
So the good news is,
there can't be just this, empty space. It goes one way. Nature abhors a vacuum.
No, that's not entirely true. Like, neutrality is instilled vacuum. Is a strategic form of creating a vacuum in order to create stability to both sides.
But if it comes to an end for Switzerland, do you go drift into these other Western institutions?
I mean, they would. I mean, that's again. There's really only neutrality or NATO. There's nothing else to join. So the whole should we abandon neutrality is really a debate about should we join NATO. At the moment, the public opinion is heavily against this, and even if we lost this referendum, it would not mean that we automatically join NATO. It would just empower people who argue to do this. On the other hand, even the people who are against the referendum are not in favor of joining NATO. They're just not in favor of, as they say, tie the hands of our government. I'm very much in favor of tying their hands, because they've been trying to use the hands in order to embrace the other side, because they don't say we want to join NATO, but what they're saying is we need to cooperate, integrate to the point, and I just need to tell you this, to the point where in one of our strategy papers, white papers of 2 years ago, it literally says we need to be certified by NATO that we are that we have day zero connectivity, that if we flip the switch, then we can immediately be integrated into the entire structure. And yet they do that, but at the same time, the same people will tell you, but we are not aiming at joining NATO. So you see the double speak, but I think the double speak reflects double think. in the heads of these people. And of course, there's a couple of people, about 10 to 15%, who would like to join NATO. The rest is against it. But this is kind of the thing we're in. And of course, they need to defeat the referendum first in order then to go toward Finland and Sweden. Although it's not automatic, and actually time works against these people, because NATO is getting weaker by the day, and it's also getting much more authoritarian by the day. So does the European Union, and in my view, it's only a matter of a couple of years until a large part of Switzerland will actually see that. There's going to be another test. The European Union wants us to do a framework agreement with them, in which they want to impose stuff like the European Court of Justice as the tiebreaker if we have a disagreement and stuff like that. And my prediction is, even if the neutrality referendum fails, that one will probably also fail, because the European Union, even in Switzerland, is not looked at anymore as this entire peace project. A lot of people are getting that economic coercion is very much part and parcel of the game, and it's probably going to increase over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd have to be blind not to see that. Both the weakening, as you say, of NATO and the increasing authoritarianism of the European Union. Yeah, I mean, Peter, what Pascal was saying was not that it's going to be neutrality or NATO, but that they are trying to push the debate further into the definition, to enlarge, if you like, the definition of neutrality, which currently is not defined, and particularly not defined in economic terms.
Make it more elastic. Okay, yes.
Yeah. No, to make it more defined, to expand the definition of neutrality, particularly to include as Pascal said. But could I just make one? Can I give one piece of free advice? And that is that comes from a colleague of mine at my university in the west of France. He says he doesn't like the word sanctions. He's a lawyer specialized in the laws of war, and he says we shouldn't use the word sanctions, because a sanction in law is a punishment imposed after a judicial process. That's what a sanction is. If you're convicted of a crime, then you're sanctioned. Instead, we should use the more accurate term, which would be coercive economic measures.
Unilateral coercive measure,
yeah.
No, absolutely true. And the sanction business is getting way, or the unilateral coercive measure business is getting way out of hand, to the point where the EU is starting to use it against its own citizens in its own countries. Yeah, and it's going to get worse. Yeah. And 2 Swiss have already been sanctioned, Jacques Beau and Nathalie Yamp. And this has not sunk into Switzerland yet. There's a large part of Switzerland that doesn't actually know about it, but if it does, and if it gets worse, I mean, this will be further a reason for Switzerland, even if we don't go with this referendum, if it doesn't work, that will push us away again. So I don't think that Swiss neutrality is dead, but I do understand that, especially if looked at it from Russia, it's kind of a very empty shell at this moment.
Yeah.
People like me would like to strengthen it again.
I'm surprised you say that the Jacques Beau case has not percolated through into the Swiss consciousness.
It was there in a couple of newspapers and so on, but it was second, third rank news. So it was never made a big deal. And you can see, I mean, our government is very embarrassed by it. And I think also our public broadcaster is embarrassed by it. But it's not in the large consciousness of everybody. I had to explain the whole thing to my parents, my friends, my family, what happened. They were aware that something happened, but I mean, somebody who was arrested somewhere, something like that, a former colonel. It wasn't the full scale and scope of this thing, of this non-judicial measure, punishing somebody for something that's not illegal by the European Union, explicitly saying that's not a punishment, it's an educational measure. That kind of the authoritarianism of it hasn't sunk in at all. It's a relatively small group of us who are intimately aware of what it means, but we're still trying to shout out and alert others about the danger of this thing.
Yeah.
Pascal, you visited Russia. What were your impressions?
My impression was that Russia is a highly functional society. The whole idea that the unilateral coercive measures are doing irreparable harm to me.
Oh, you used the term. Wow.
No, absolutely right. You're absolutely right about the terminology. Russia works well. It was a hospitable country. It was very kind. I wish the internet was as open as the people are. The internet is a bit of a challenge from both sides. I mean, there's things that Russia blocks to go out, and there's things that from the outside are blocked and Russia cannot access. I mean, ChatGPT and so on, they just don't serve Russia and whatnot. And so I could feel a difference in the way in which communication was possible, but that's from both sides.
Well, just since you mentioned it, it is one of the most highly discussed, debated, and argued issue in Russia. Okay,
yeah.
I mean, with my team, there isn't a day that doesn't go by that somebody mentions something. I mean, for example, yesterday and today for about 1 hour each day.
Yeah. No, but it's I mean, it's
and then everything is just fine. It's very, it's like I said to my wife at lunch today, I said, we've just gotten used to it now.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that on the one hand, of course, for instance, banning YouTube was a decision by the Russian state or by one part of the Russian state. But then on the other hand, on everybody has a VPN and everybody knows how to access it, and even people like Mr. Medvedev put a lot of things out on X and on all of these platforms. So you can just see how Russia is obviously not a unitary actor. Obviously, there's not an agreement on everything, and actually, there's a lot of leeway to deal with things. So it seems to me that Russia is a pragmatic place that deals with that has contradictions, but doesn't necessarily try to pretend that they're not there.
Yeah, but I have a VPN that I watch YouTube every single day.
Almost everybody has. All of the Russians I met have VPN, so it's like, okay. It reminds me very much of Japan, actually. I mean, Japan internet is open, but Japan has these moments when something is not supposed to be done, but if you do it, there's no punishment for it, and everybody does it anyhow. So societally it works. It's just like what's on the outside, what's written on the outside, and what's happening on the inside are two different things, but it's well understood.
Well, I mean, as I explained to John a few weeks ago, one can come from the trajectory of censorship and information control. But as I explained to John, there's a much more simplistic explanation for it. They want you to pay for a VPN. It's a very lucrative business, okay?
So overall, I found Russia very functioning and functional, and actually, payment and so on. I was that everything is done digitally, and because I had to use my physical ruble, that sometimes people had to run back in order to find some ruble themselves in order to give me change and whatnot. That was surprising, like by the degree to which the Russian economy is actually.
I haven't paid for anything in currency for 3 years.
Yeah.
Wow,
makes me.
I keep a small sum of cash in my pocket for tips.
Yeah. No, so I mean, it's obviously a very, very modern place. Although I spent most of my time in Pskov and not in Moscow, so I actually haven't seen Moscow, but I've seen Pskov, and Pskov is a lovely place. And Russia, I found it a lovely place overall. So my biggest wish would be that the war can be wound down, and that we can get over Russophobia, which was the conference that I attended was about, and that we can finally heal these wounds. Because obviously these places belong together, but the Europeans are doing whatever they can.
I'm afraid we're a very long way from that, and we're traveling in the opposite direction right now.
Yeah, but my wish remains. My wish,
of course.
Wish remains.
Yeah.
No, I mean, when this conflict comes to an end, the conflict will remain. It'll just be broader. I mean, it's if Brian Berlelik, very interesting character. He put on a very, very long post on X today in all of the different fronts, and he's right. He's absolutely right.
He is. That's why I'm saying I don't think it's realistic that it will change soon. But it is my wish that we move in the opposite direction again, and finally, I mean, the division that was there of a common European home and a common security structure. I mean, that should be the goal. But I know that the forces that work against this are extremely strong. But what we have to do is to expose little by little, as he does, the grand strategic element, as we did in this conference, some of the psychological elements, like the Russophobia that goes back hundreds of years, and that's a racist enterprise, highly functional though. I mean, because it does whip up all of these elements, and but we need to work on it bit by bit.
Yeah, be careful.
The danger now is real. I mean, what Karaganov is arguing for.
I know it's very real,
And the thing is, over here, again, nobody understands, also in Switzerland, that we are not talking just about, opposing the Russians. We're talking about nuclear annihilation of the goddamn continent if we don't get our S together.
No, the strategy, I mean, I was in Russia, as Peter knows, the week before you, I think, Pascal, for the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. Yeah. And I saw with my own eyes the results of drone attacks. And they were, on my first day, there were 60 that flew into St. Petersburg. And then as I left, there were hundreds that flew all over Russia. So the strategy is very clearly to provoke a response. And obviously, as you say, not just Karaganov, there are lots of people who are calling for one and calling for a much more muscular response than maybe Peter is. I don't.
No, and it's very.
I live here. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And while I was in Peskov, they blew up in Sevastopol that monument, that building, and being in Peskov and understanding just how cultured Russia is and how many feelings Russia attaches to culture and to the memory of the Second World War.
It's a very big thing. It's a very big thing.
These statues and whatnot, and just seeing how the Second World War has to be remembered in Russia, and then attacking that, which has no strategic or tactical value other than provoking Russia. And they're working on that so much. But that's why I don't know how to solve that, because on the one hand, I want to tell Russia, don't get provoked, because that's what they want. On the other hand, they are trying to bring you to a boil and then go all in. But I don't know how to deal with that. It's a horrible situation to be in, and you cannot expect Russia to do what Iran did, which is to say, like, fine, we're going to absorb it, because I don't know. I mean, that you need almost a spiritual foreign policy in order to be able to do that, and I don't think that this is just not the level at which I think Russia works.
Okay, well, listen, that's a big challenge. I mean, I've got one or two initiatives I know about which are very much going in that direction. I'll talk about them with you on email. But let's wind up the discussion, which has been fabulous. Thank you so much, Pascal. It's always an absolute delight to have you on, and I hope you'll find time to come on again as soon as possible. Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for watching. All the best. Bye.